Chris Carter here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. The Steelers missed out on Brandon Aiyuk. We talk about the fallout and what's next for Omar Khan. Also, Troy Fautanu might be coming back this week, and Cam Heyward with no extension. All that here and more on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Jenna Harner's back on the show. It's going to be a fun one. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. We are rejoined by the woman herself, Jenna Harner of Channel 11 WXI. She is married. She is back. She has gotten through training camp. We are so happy to have her back on the show. Jenna, how you doing?
I'm so glad to be back. I've been gone so long, the intro has changed. That's
how
long
it's literally been. Has. I didn't
phenomenal.
think about that.
It's fantastic, but I've been gone that long. So very happy to be back. It's been a wild whirlwind summer, as I'm sure it's been for a lot of people. And I'm sure, the Steelers, it's been a wild whirlwind of a summer for the Steelers too. But I'm just happy to be back talking some Steelers football. Hard to believe this time next week, we'll be making some picks, Chris.
Actually, yeah, we will be. And we will be getting the Pick'em League back up, and we'll post it in the Locked On Steelers Facebook group as well as on my Twitter at Carter Critiques. So be on the lookout for that over the weekend/week. We'll be getting into that. Also, for those who do like the new music, it's from Johnny Quest, the Rebel. Go check out his Spotify today. But Jenna, we have to get through all this now. We got to talk about the Brandon Aiyuk situation. Officially, he signed his 5-year extension. Big money, huge money for him. And, there's been a myriad of reactions. There's been the, this is what we always said would happen reaction. It's kind of where I'm at because I told y'all in March this probably wasn't going to happen. But there's also the, oh my gosh, the Steelers completely flubbed this. This is terrible. It's a black eye on Omar Khan. Like, exactly. There's all these different takes about how this is terrible for the Steelers, or it's kind of indifferent because they weren't getting him anyway because they weren't offering that kind of stuff. Where do you fall in this? Is this a bad spot for the Steelers that they didn't get Brandon Aiyuk, or is this kind of just like what was going to happen because they weren't trying to spend all that much to get him?
It felt like exactly what was going to happen. And my biggest thing, like I kept saying coming into this entire situation, was this has felt like how the 49ers have handled business with all of the last major guys that they've negotiated with contract-wise. I feel like, didn't this just happen with Deebo Samuel? And everyone's like, oh, he wants out. He doesn't want to be there. And John Lynch and company held pat, stayed true to the deal that they had put on the table. And sure enough, oh, look, in the 11th hour, he's a 49er. Like, that's exactly what I felt like this situation was going to be coming in with Brandon Aiyuk. And yes, the Steelers did exactly what they set out to do. They put an offer out there. They said, hey, look, we're giving you this. It's on the table. Take it or leave it. We're not moving from this. And it always felt to me like he was going to re-sign with the 49ers. It just didn't seem like a situation. And I know there were the jokes of like, okay, after the first preseason game that with both Russ and Justin Fields where things didn't look great against the Bills, there's all those, maybe he's not going to sign here just based on what he saw. But in the reality of this, I never thought this was going to happen. I know there was a lot of social media stuff that led a lot of people to believe different things. And that's kind of when I always caution and say, hey, media literacy is a great thing. Know who you should be listening to, who you should not be listening to. And not saying that in terms of like throwing shade or anything, just like in the generality talking of this, like the people who are around the team every day and everybody who's hearing things that's on the ground, they have more of the information. They kind of get the feel of that. And I think you and I were very similar in that sense where it was just going to be like, hey, look, the Steelers put it on the table. And if he didn't, it always felt to me, I'm going in circles a little bit, always felt like he was going to stay with the 49ers. I also don't think this is a black eye on Omar Khan or anything like that. He put an offer out for a guy that is one of the best receivers in the league that would have made the team better no matter what, while also not giving up a whole lot. in terms of what that offer had to handle. Now I think it's kind of the reassess situation here. And I'm sure, again, like, we're not in the front office. We're not knowing, the entirety of what's going on behind the scenes, but there's still moves that could be made. And I think the Steelers kind of knew trading away Deontay Johnson. They were bringing in a player in that trade in Dante Jackson that was going to fill a need that they had. And there's going to be other ways around it. To me, I don't think this is as like quote unquote glaring of a hole as it's going to be, especially because I think a lot of people are forgetting two big things here. The Steelers are going to look to be a run-first team this year.
Yep.
Pat Freiermuth is probably also going to kind of take on that role, like you and I have been saying, of a wide receiver too, and the targets he's going to see based on this offense.
That's the thing here is that while he's a tight end, he is going to be kind of the wide receiver too. I've also pointed out that when you look at Arthur Smith's offenses, or not at Arthur Smith's past Steelers offenses, the best ones sometimes have not needed a superstar wide receiver too as an option. I think it was Tone Diggs. I think it was Tone. It was Tone from the Pat McAfee show who pointed out, look at the last time that the Tennessee Titans made the AFC Championship game, it was. And it did, like their number 2 wide receivers were a bunch of people that you don't even remember. They had AJ Brown and then a litany of just guys. And again, that was a Titans roster with Ryan Tannehill at quarterback. Yes, Derrick Henry was there, and that is a big factor. But again, that's why they want to have this really good 1-2 punch of Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. But they had those things, but they did not have anything close to the kind of defense the Steelers look to have this year. And that's where, again, why I don't think this was a big deal that the Steelers didn't get him. It's not a black guy. It'd be one thing if this team had nothing else going for it. If they didn't have a Defensive Player of the Year candidate in TJ Watt, if they didn't have a first-team All-Pro safety in Minkah Fitzpatrick, massive signings at the linebacker position, young draft guys that are looking really promising, guys, second-year guys like Keanu Benton and Joey Porter Jr. who look really promising. It would be different if signing Aiyuk would have been like the big thing that would prop up this team, but that's not what the case is right now. And I think that's why it's not a big deal. I do think they make a move for a wide receiver. I think they might sign a free agent who's a lower level, and they might make a trade. They might make a trade for a number 2 wide receiver that's at the caliber of a Van Jefferson just for depth. But it's why I said all along, I did not see this team spending first-round draft pick type of capital to go get a wide receiver that they then have to also pay big money to.
And it didn't feel like, I don't want to say this in a bad way, especially with the fact that the season's just starting, but it doesn't to me right now on paper feel like this Steelers team is a Brandon Aiyuk away from a Super Bowl, from being a contender in that way. This team still has a lot to work out, and just in terms of also like, we haven't seen the true offense yet. That's the other part of this whole thing too. Is like we haven't seen what this offense is going to look like in an actual game setting that counts, especially too with what they, didn't entirely display in all of the preseason matchups that we saw in terms of like opening up the entirety of the playbook in that way too. So this team to me just is not there yet. And so
Agreed.
And I mean, again, there's so many guys you can add. The depth that they have right now is solid. You have to also kind of count on the fact that Roman Wilson ideally gets healthy for you, and we don't know what he can be. He can ascend into that role, into that wide receiver 2 spot, depending on when he gets healthy and how quickly he gets up to speed with everything. He talked to me in the locker room the other day about the mental reps and how beneficial that's been, and just talking to the guys. Russ's mentorship for him is really, really, really being a big thing. He mentioned it and Russ mentioned it. Again, this team just to me wasn't there quite yet, and I don't think this is this big glaring hole. Would this team have wanted Brandon Aiyuk? Absolutely. You add a guy like that in the locker room, he immediately makes this team better. But to me, this isn't like, oh my God, the world's on fire, it's over, get Omar Khan out of here, he didn't do it. Like, no, absolutely not.
I'm right with you, and that's why I continue to say it's not a big deal. I still think the Steelers make a move, maybe even some moves at wide receiver, but it was not their priority. And again, a big part of this is because they're going to most likely sign George Pickens to a big deal after this season. So if they're signing him to a big deal, they might draft another receiver high next year, but I don't think it would be it would behoove them to sign a Brandon Aiyuk to a big deal. When you got George Pickens coming up, when you got Pat Freiermuth probably around the corner. Honestly, if they're going to re-sign Pat Freiermuth, they're probably going to do that maybe by the time you all are listening to or watching this episode, or sometime this weekend, or early next week. But again, looking at all those different things there, it just adds up why they weren't doing it in the first place. I didn't think this was a priority for them. It would have been great if they could have swindled the Niners and got them out of them, but the Niners aren't stupid like I said they weren't, and here we are. But there are other things that are relevant to the Steelers other than Brandon Aiyuk, and thank goodness this is probably the last segment I'll have to do on this ever. But let's talk about that, Jenna, because we got some news that there could be a key offensive lineman returning to the Steelers next week. We'll talk about that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I'll remind you this show is brought to you by 5 Hour Energy. 5 Hour Energy can come in the clutch for you whenever you need a quick boost. 5 Hour Energy fixes tired fast, whether you have a long list to do for work or a long list for your do-it-yourself projects to tackle at home. Just take a 5 Hour Energy shot so you can check everything off your list. If you're like me, you always have a large list of projects for the home. And when you get your supplies for the project, don't forget the most essential supply, a 5 Hour Energy shot. With zero sugar and a convenient portable size, it's the perfect pick-me-up for getting stuff done. The 5 Hour Energy website has flavors galore like watermelon, tropical burst, grape, berry, and more. And there's a flavor for everyone. Try them all. On the site, you can even see the option to build your own 12-pack or your own 24-pack. You choose the flavors, and it's delivered right to your door. If you go to 5 Hour Energy, that is the number 5hourenergy.com, and get some 5 Hour Energy, get the 5 Hour Energy product today by using the promo code LOCKEDONFB. That's LOCKEDONFB, and you'll get 20% off your order at 5 Hour Energy. The offer is valid only through September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders. Go to 5hourenergy.com today. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, Chris Carter with Jenna Harner from Channel 11 WPXI. Jenna, Troy Fautanu says he's going to try to practice next week, and it looks like he will practice next week. It was projected he wouldn't be out too long with his knee injury. He's been moving around at practice. He's been working his way back. Seems like now he'll be back. But the big question is, will he actually be back enough to practice? Because we know how the Steelers feel about rookies in general. If you don't, but like we saw Joey Porter Jr., it took him a month before he became a starter in the Steelers defense, even when they desperately needed help at cornerback last year. But Troy Fautanu was rumored to be, quote unquote, the second best lineman on the team when they were evaluating guys during training camp before he got hurt. Do you foresee Troy Fautanu stepping up and getting that right tackle job, or how do you see this playing out for week one?
Yeah, this is kind of a big question, and one I think now, obviously, with the Isaac Seumalo news, a lot of people are kind of like anxiously awaiting even more, because this offensive line was supposed to be kind of like, oh, we don't have to even worry about the offensive line coming into week one. Like, that wasn't the big question mark. And now all of a sudden it feels like it is, just based on how banged up they already are. I mean, again, Broderick Jones dealing with what he's dealing with. He seems like things are fine in that area based on how we've talked with him over the last couple of weeks here, or I should say since the last, what was it, the Bills preseason game? Yeah, it was from the Bills preseason game to now. The timelines are, I don't even know. I always say I don't know what day it is, and it hits even more. We're back in football season. But how much of an impact is that still having on him? And obviously Isaac Seumalo's injury, and with Troy Fautanu too, it would be a very, very good thing if we see him the steps we see him take in practice this coming week, and just talking with him and seeing kind of how much they have him do. That's going to tell us a lot about what we can expect in his availability. Also, we get practice reports in terms of injuries this week too, so that'll be kind of a good thing to follow, and we'll really be able to get a little bit more of a gauge rather than just what the guys are saying and what their teammates are saying. We'll have a little bit more of like a definitive style of thing. I'm not entirely sure, just based on the way that we know kind of the Steelers do things. I could see them very realistically wanting to wait and wanting to be a little more cautious. However, they might have more of a need right now and want to get him in there quickly so that they can also move Broderick over, because that's kind of, I think that's a big part of Broderick's development too, is like you're hampering him and his development at that left tackle spot just based on all of the injuries and the way that they have to kind of put these puzzle pieces together to make sure they have 5 healthy starting caliber guys in this lineup come next Sunday when they play Atlanta.
I think that's a big part of this is just having guys healthy, period, is going to go a long way. I mean, this is an offensive line that's banged up. They were hoping to have Nate Herbig as a backup. He's not there. They got Ryan McCollum behind Zach Frazier. Isaac Seumalo was going to be one of the biggest parts of this offensive line, and he's out at least for a month right now, which means they still have to figure out who's starting at guard. Do they put Spencer Anderson there? Do they put Mason McCormick there? Or do they try to do something finicky with their tackle situation and say, hey, Fautanu or more, bump in there? I don't think that they would do that. I think that it's going to be a Mason McCormick or Spencer Anderson. I think it's probably Spencer Anderson for his versatility. But and because he was there last year. But I like the things I saw out of Mason McCormick. But this is, week 1, that's a tough job. You're going up against Grady Jarrett, who's one of the better defensive tackles in the league. He's small, he's quick, he's technical. He's going to beat you if you're not sound. They're going to need to help that guy, because also whoever that is that they pick is going to be a rookie or a second-year player, and they're going to be lining up next to a rookie center. So there's going to be some challenges that the Steelers face in that situation. But as far as Fautanu, I have to think that part of what Mike Tomlin has harped on Fautanu since we've heard of him, since he's been drafted, was that he loved the age that he comes in. The same thing for Frazier. Why is Zach Frazier starting? I think even without Herbig, he was going to start week 1 this year because they were eventually going to give him that shot. But Fautanu and Frazier came in with a ton of experience. He said both of those guys are kind of grown men already. That's where I think if Fautanu comes in, he practices full practice from Monday all the way to Friday. I think the Steelers are happy with that, and I think that they're like, okay, we're gonna put you in. But the question is, if they did that, where would they move somebody? Would they move Broderick Jones? I've been wondering with Broderick Jones. He hasn't been playing as well in the preseason. He's been struggling with his punching, that maybe that's tied to the elbow brace he had to wear on his right arm. What if they rest Broderick Jones and say, hey, get back healthy so we can see you at your full strength, and then let Dan Moore Jr., who, funny enough, was actually the most productive tackle in the preseason for the Steelers. But if they let Broderick Jones rest, bring Charlie Fautanu back if he's healthy, that might be a solution. Or do they just go with the first-round tackle, put Fautanu at right, Broderick Jones at left, and tell Dan Moore to just be ready at either position, because they did give Dan Moore some work at right tackle this week. I don't think it's like extensive work, but I think that the Steelers, they have some shuffling around to do this weekend. It's going to be a quick order for Tomlin and Pat Meyer to figure out.
Yeah, I think Monday and Wednesday at practice are going to tell us a whole lot, just in terms of the configurations that we see and where they have people lining up quickly. Again, it's full steam ahead. We always hear Mike Tomlin talk about getting guys on a moving train. This is going to be jump on and go. And I'm interested. The experience part of this too makes a lot of sense as to why, if Fautanu is healthy and the Steelers feel like he is good enough to be in there, and the way he works in practice, Tomlin always also highlights the practice work throughout the week too. If that is something that we see, I do think that that's a good chance, because again, the experience Fautanu and obviously Frazier have coming into this year compared to what Broderick had coming in a year ago, drastic differences just in the amount of game time that though the two picks this year saw in college compared to Broderick Jones in his college, his time with Georgia. So I'm going to be very intrigued to see. I think we'll get those key kind of tells in just the way the Steelers do things very early next week. And that will be kind of a big, hey, is he working in with the first team? Is he, out there getting reps, working through his full potential, as much as, having that full practice compared to being any sort of limited or anything like that. So you can sense his optimism. He seems to be confident and ready. It's just going to be a matter, I think, too, of like what the Steelers coaching staff decides. Hey, are we going full steam ahead with this, or are we kind of pumping the brakes here, making sure he's fully healed so that he can get in at a time that we feel it's going to be beneficial for both him and for the team?
I agree. It's going to be a big question. We'll get to see that early next week when the Steelers start taking to the practice field. So keep an eye on that. On all things here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But we've been talking about a lot of young players. Let's talk about the oldest player on the team. That's Cam Heyward, who doesn't have an extension yet. What does that mean? What does it say about the defensive line and what they're looking at? We'll talk about that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Jenna Harner. Stick with us. We'll be right back. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. That's what brings home the winning trophy, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts that you need at the prices that you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay's Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Jenna Harner of Channel 11 WPXI. Jenna, there's no news on the Cam Heyward front as far as him getting an extension like he wanted. Remember, he was holding out during OTAs, and he came back at the end of OTAs, and he spoke in the Steelers locker room on was it Wednesday, and did talk about, hey, like, I wanted to be here to prove that I can do this, I can be here, but he also talked about being there for his team. And that seems to embody who Cam Heyward is. Like, he's the captain. He puts the team first. And it does make me wonder if him going through that is going to value something to Omar Khan in this front office. Because the other thing is that going into this season, there were major questions about going into this training camp, and preseason. There were some major questions about who's going to be the depth on defensive line. Is Larry Ogunjobi going to be any good? But he looked good. He looked healthy in the preseason. Keanu Benton, can he take a step forward? He looks like he's very much ready to do so. DeMarvin Leal, will he even be able to be played because he was a healthy scratch last year? Looks like he's going to be available. Montrevious Adam looks good. There's depth. There's other answers on the defensive line. So me thinking here, my question to you, Jenna, do you think the Steelers lean more towards, hey, we got a lot of help on the defensive line, we don't need to really push to sign Cam Heyward? Or do you think that you're like, you know what, that's the leader, he wants to stick around, we're going to find a way to make this work?
It feels like the latter part of that to me, only just based on the way Cam was talking with us Wednesday. I was in that scrum listening to just, I don't know, to me it didn't seem, and maybe I'm just reading far too much into this, but to me it didn't seem like there was this like anger or frustration or anything. It was just like, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. And he kind of just was like, it's out of my control kind of, I think everybody's trying to do that whole like, hey, not worry about what we can control type of thing. I feel like there was a little bit of that, but every time we've talked with, the last time we talked with Omar Khan as well, the way he just spoke about it led me to believe that this was going to be one of those things that is going to happen. It just kind of feels like it's going to come down to the wire, as a lot of these do. Go back to TJ 2 years ago. Yeah. It was the Friday before. It was 2 days before the week 1 game day, and it happened. So to me, it feels like it's going to be one of those things that potentially we see get done. I don't want to crazily say optimistically, but it just has that feeling to me of like, hey, this will be something that gets done within the next week-ish here, week and a couple days. I mean, even Cam was joking. He's like, crazier things have happened. He's like, Troy was signing on the plane to the game. So the lightheartedness to which he approached those questions the other day led me to believe that like this is going to be something that both sides are like, hey, we're confident in. There's not a lot of news, but they feel like ideally something gets done soon.
I think so too. I think there's going to be I think there's going to be something that comes around the corner. I think the Steelers, they've been handling a lot of things, behind the scenes. And I said this back, like when the Steelers were handling free agency and people were wondering, where's this move happening? When's this move happening? The Steelers have an order about doing things. They wait to see how things are playing out. They want to see, how teams, how certain things play out, like, find out answers to bigger questions. And I think a lot of that has been, hey, how's this Brandon Aiyuk going to stay up? Stuff going to play out? Because you know what? If somehow the Niners did give up Brandon Aiyuk, the Steelers are going to be paying around $28 to $30 million a year for him. that would impact their probably their decisions with how much they would be able to pay a Cam Heyward, a Pat Freiermuth, you know, a Najee Harris, a George Pickens in 2 years. You know, there's big questions there, and I think that's where the Steelers have kind of been, and why a deal might not have been in place. But I do think that Omar Khan has these conversations on the back burner, and it would not shock me if by the time that I'm setting up to do my Monday show on like Sunday evening, that we now have Pat Freiermuth news to announce, or that we're getting ready to talk about it. So I wouldn't be shocked if Cam Heyward is also in those talks as well. It
did almost feel like the Aiyuk domino had to fall, or at least that's how I've kind of been reading the situation. Yeah. Again, it might not be like, I'm not hearing anything. I don't want people to be like, oh, well, it's a sort. No. I'm not hearing anything specifically on that front, but it just kind of felt in that way where it's like they were waiting to see what happened. They were waiting to see how things shook out, because there was, again, I didn't think it was going to happen, but there was a small chance that Aiyuk said, hey, no, I'm not going back to the Niners. Didn't believe that was going to, I believed in, he always was going to go back there. But in the case that it didn't, I think the Steelers were just trying to keep options open. Again, we saw the move Omar Khan made in the way that he restructured Alex Highsmith's contract earlier this offseason, and potentially for, hey, if they're going to make a move in some way, shape, or form. And now I think this next week and couple days ahead of the opener against the Falcons, we might see a couple things. We might not, because again, the Steelers, as soon as the season starts, they don't do business. But I realistically think that these are two things that have been priorities for them. I think, to me, the interesting thing too with Cam is just the term more than anything. I think he obviously wants, you know, multiple years, and I don't know if the Steelers really want that in that way. But I think too, in the way that he's handled situation, you know, this whole situation in the way that the Steelers have, I think that this, to me, we could see something where it's like, hey, we're going to add another year on here, let you have 2 years on your contract, and then kind of talk things through moving forward. I think that could be something that could suit both sides. Again, we don't know entirely how Cam would feel about that. I don't know, but I just realistically, this does seem like something to me where it's like, hey, okay, the Aiyuk situation has settled. Now let's turn our attention towards our own business and kind of move things forward. I think that could be potentially how the front office is kind of looking to attack things here.
Yeah, and because again, Omar Khan, he's been known for being a cap savvy man, a market savvy man. And the other thing here is, like you said, I don't close the door on the Steelers making a trade, you know, for another player, whether that be like, you know, a Tyler Lockett or a DK Metcalf or someone of that caliber. And DK Metcalf much higher caliber than Tyler Lockett, but still, my point is finding a veteran wide receiver that can add to their ranks right now, and how expensive they would be, not just this year but moving forward. But yeah, so I do think there's going to be some serious questions as far as that happens, but it might take for that to happen, or for the Steelers to get a sense of how that will play out before that they drop these dominoes. And a reminder, some of these deals that we're waiting for, that we talk about with their re-signing players, they happen at the last minute, right before the first regular season game. Like literally, when Troy Polamalu signed a big extension, he literally signed it while getting on the plane to the team's game. In that year. TJ Watt, you and I were there for that when he signed in like the week leading up to week 1. So like it wouldn't shock me about if this took time and we didn't see this until like Wednesday, Thursday, or even Friday of next week, when Freiermuth or Harris or Hayward or whoever signs it. I think that Freiermuth and Hayward are more likely than Harris, because Harris, might be a guy that they just kind of figured out on. But again, I think that stuff's going to wait until they figure out some other things still.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think like whatever we're recording this on Thursday. I think by Friday when this comes out, I realistically could see one of either, again, a Freiermuth deal, a Cam Heyward deal. I could see one of those, if not both, come to fruition. Again,
right?
Crazier things have happened. Things can change. Things we might not expect might happen as well. But I think that there is a good chance, just in the pattern that we've seen the Steelers operate over the last, since this is my 5th season covering the team now, the way I've seen them operate, but also just historically how this team makes these types of decisions, comes down to the wire.
I agree entirely. She's Jenna Harner of Channel 11 WPXI. Jenna, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to have you back on the show. Let people can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
It is so great to be back. I am so thrilled to be joining you again. It's been a fun summer, but happy to talk Steelers. You can find me on Twitter at Jenna Harner11, Instagram Jenna_Harner, and locally WPXI here in Pittsburgh. Chris, it is Skylights Friday Night Football.
Yes,
so if you are in Pittsburgh, put Channel 11 on. If you are outside of the viewing market, you can watch it on our app. We have a whole lot of fun, lots of really exciting games, but we have a bunch of Steelers stuff too coming your way this season. So definitely stay tuned. Got lots of stuff coming your way.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jenna, and thank you all for tuning into the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday, on your favorite podcasting app and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of your Monday through Friday episodes. And like Jenna said, check me out tonight, Friday night, Skylights, talking high school football highlights, 11:35-ish p.m. I believe. All right, when do we go on? I always mix
11:15.
11:15. Excuse me. This is what I get. It's week one, baby. We're getting in. But 11:15, Channel 11, Appointment Television. Chris Carter and Jenna Harner talking high school highlights on WPXI. Be there, be square. We're back on Monday with another episode of the Locked On Steelers podcast on your Pittsburgh Steelers.